Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the YouTube channel grecochess, the channel where we present, analyze, discuss, and present the various aspects of the game of chess. I'm your host, my name is Karylos Aniziris, and in this video, we continue presenting games that have just been completed as part of the online tournament grecochess that takes place at the online webpage chess.com. 16 players started with 4 groups of 4, and the 4 winners from every group advanced to the final round. Just to repeat once again, the time control is 3 days per move. Out of these 12 games of the final round, 4 times 3, 12, 2 ended very fast, 1 move resignation, and I'm not going to cover them, and out of the remaining 10, 8 have been completed. We have already presented 3 out of these 8, and now it's time for the 4th one of myskin versus maximgovorukha. Let's repeat. The 4 finalists is maximgovorukha from the Ukraine, myskin from Italy, Barak 7 from Israel, and myself, the Harry, from Greece. And let's share the screen and see what happened at this game now. And here we are. Repeat once again, we are only showing part of the screen because we don't want to spoil the result. We don't want to show to you until the very end to see what exactly happened. And you see myskin with 1493 versus maximgovorukha with 1813. Clearly, maximgovorukha was the favorite in this game, but let's see what actually happened. With myskin as white, starting with pawn to e4, the most popular first move for white. French defense for maximgovorukha. The comment of the coach says, like its cousin the Caro-Kann, the French defense can help build a strong pawn structure. Second move, pawn to d4, the most popular second move for white in the French. And pawn to d5, and let's not go too fast. Pawn to d5 for black. Black still pawn fights for central control, attacking the e4 pawn, says the coach. There is an artificially generated online coach that provides various comments. And the next move for myskin is bishop to d3. This is an okay third move. You see it's a book. You see the book here. It's usually not the most popular move for white because usually you send either the knight to c3 or to d2, or the pawn may go to e5 or may take the pawn to d5. But it's okay. Bishop d3 develops a bishop towards the center and defends the e4 pawn, says the online coach. And let's see what happened next. Pawn to c5 for maximgovorukha. This is the last book move. This strikes at the center to fight for space. And let's see how does myskin continue. Takes a pawn on c5. It's tempting to win a pawn, but first of all, you not win it for too long because the bishop is ready to grab it. And also, it distracts the pawn from the center, so that is why it's inaccuracy. And the online coach says there were worse moves, but also something much better. Much better would be, as you see with the arrow, the pawn on e4 takes on d5. Bishop takes back on c5, inaccuracy, and the coach says there was only one good move there, and as you see with the arrow, it is the pawn on d5 taking the pawn on e4. Next move, pawn takes to d5. Again, the computer would rather have the knight jump to c3. And pawn takes back. So we completed the first 5 moves, and the game is even. White has 0.0, it says here, 0.07. If you want to add the second decimal digit, you can see it here, is a very small, very tiny advantage for white. That means almost nothing. And now 6th move, then myskin checks with the queen on e2. Response with knight to e7. The problem with the queen checking so early, by the way, is first of all, black both replies the check and develops a piece. And second, white needs to be very careful, make sure a rook will not, the queen may not be pinned with a rook on e8. And you don't like to bring unnecessarily the queen too early outside. white could have developed some other piece better. That is the issue why. That's why you see black is slightly better by 0.1 here. Let's continue. Knight f3, okay, that's a good move for myskin, develops a knight, it's ready to castle. King side, short side, as I say, short castling for maximgovorukha. Same for myskin, king side castling. Pawn to h6 for Maxim Govorukha that might be afraid of a bishop landing on g5 and pinning the knight on e7. It's an easy way to answer it, but the computer just gives a check mark, meaning good move, because yes, ideally you want to develop a piece and you're not supposed to be so careless to have to worry about accidentally moving the e7 knight. Of course, if the pin is going to be so hard that you cannot avoid losing the piece, okay, but otherwise you shouldn't act out of fear that maybe in the future you might accidentally move the pin piece. And well, let's be fair that I also have dealt with these fears and also have acted accordingly. I'm only saying ideally what should happen. Rook to e1 for myskin that attacks once more the knight on e7. Knight to c6 for from b to c6 to be more exact. For Maxim Govorukha develops another piece. Pawn to a3 for myskin also might be scared of either a knight or a bishop landing on you. Before, if the bishop lands, it attacks the rook on e1. If the knight lands, it might exchange itself with the bishop on d3. But the computer thinks it's okay to react to that, but the best way is not to the pawn to a3, but the pawn to c3, because you both block these attacks and also control the d4 square. Bishop to g4 for myskin, and now pins the knight on f3. We completed the first 10 moves, and you see an advantage for Maxim Govorukha of 0.3. But still, this is very small. Many things can happen. Bishop to b4 for myskin that both attacks the bishop on c5, meaning wins the tempo, and also gains more space. The computer doesn't like it. Would rather have the bishop go to e3 and block the bishop on c5. Bishop to d4 for Maxim Govorukha and attacks the rook on a1. The best way to stop it is the pawn on c3. The problem with that is if the knight on b1 cannot move, at least for now. But of course, black will move the bishop. But if the bishop stays on the same long diagonal a1 to h8, then the knight on b1 cannot move for the time being. Otherwise, the c3 pawn is lost. Bishop goes to f6, the best move. Bishop to b2 for myskin. By doing so, liberates the knight on b1 and can go, for example, to d2. And Maxim Govorukha places a knight on e5. The computer gives two exclamation marks, meaning it's a brilliant move. And let's see why it's a brilliant move. It's true that it's a good move, a great move in the sense that it attacks a second time the knight on f3, and it's not easy for white to defend. If the knight checks late on f3, then the pawn has to take it because the queen cannot, it's going to be lost. And this opens the defense of myskin. And that is why this is a very good move and not easy for white to defend. If the pawn was not there on d5, they could place the bishop on e4. Maybe they can put the knight on d2. Let's see if this is going to work. Because it's the only way that white can avoid either losing material or exposing the king along the g file. And yes, knight goes to d2, and it's the best move. And Maxim Govorukha strengthens the attack by bringing the knight to g6, even though the computer would rather have it on c6 to have more control over the center, perhaps. Also control the d4 square. But now the knight from g6 can go to f4 and attack both the bishop on d3 and the queen on f1. Queen goes to f1. By doing so, blocks, I mean, there is no pin any longer. The knight on f3 is not pinned any longer. And let's see what maximgovorukha will do. Knight goes to d3. So we completed the first 10 moves, and the advantage of maximgovorukha has risen to 1.7. Starts becoming important. Also, look, it's materially, of course, yes, it says +3 now for maximgovorukha, but of course, next move, white will, myskin will equalize, will take back the knight. But more than that, it is that maximgovorukha has more space and is the one with the initiative. Let's see how things will continue. And no surprise, the queen takes on d3 back as we expected, material the same. Knight to f4, so the knight on f4 attacks the queen on d3, and also you want to have a knight on your opponent's half of the board. That's what Maxim Govorukha has achieved. Where can the queen go? You'd like the queen to go and also attack the knight on f4. Let's see how. I think the only place we can do it is if the knight goes to e3, but then black has many ways to follow up. But let's see what's going to happen. Queen goes to f1, so the knight is safe on f4. Bishop to f5. Inaccurate, this is a computer. The computer would rather have the rook go to e8 and control the open e file. Not control, but at least fight for the open e file, because there's already a white rook on e1. Rook to e3 for myskin would like perhaps to double the rooks. One possibility. Rook to c8. Once again, computer wants Maxim Govorukha plays a rook on e8 to challenge the open e file. And we call it open because there are no pawns along this file. Rooks love to be in open files. Knight goes to d4 to attack the bishop on f5 and force black to react. Computer doesn't like it. Would rather have the knight go to b3, the other knight. Bishop goes to d4, a great move. So they can keep the other bishop on f5. Pawn takes back, of course. Now you see at this point, the pawn at d4 is isolated in the sense there are no white pawns on c and e files, and that is why the pawn on d4 can only be protected with pieces. Currently, there's a bishop on b2. You don't like it in general, everything else being equal, because you want your pieces to do something better, perhaps beyond the attacks, other than just defend an isolated pawn. Rook goes to c2 for Maxim Govorukha, and there is a double threat. Threatens both the bishop on b2 and the knight on d2. We completed the first 20 moves, and the advantage of Maxim Govorukha becomes 2.9, starts becoming important. Meaning, if Maxim Govorukha can avoid any mistakes, it is their game to win. But let's see how myskin will react to this double attack. Bishop to c3. Computer would rather have the bishop go to c1. What's happening is that the bishop in either one of these cases protects the knight on d2, and also the rook either on e3 here or the a1 otherwise would have protected the bishop. But although white for the time being keeps material equality, their situation becomes more and more delicate. And yes, queen goes to c8, and you see the second attack on the bishop. If bishop goes anywhere to be safe, then the knight on d2 is lost. On d2 is lost. Let's see what white is going to do. They're going to place the rook on c1, the best move. And you see why it's the best, because black otherwise wanted to take the bishop on c3. White rook would take from e3 to c3, and then queen would take to c3. But now, due to the rook on c1, that's not possible anymore. So white was barely able to avoid losing material. We changed rooks on c1, with the bishop on c3 being pinned. And Bishop goes to d3 for maximgovorukha. Why? Because it interrupts the communication between the rook on e3 and the bishop on c3. And so the bishop is defended once only by the queen on c1 instead of twice. And of course, the knight on f4 defends the bishop on d3, so the rook on e3 cannot take it. King goes to h1. Wants to avoid. This is the best move. Definitely wants to avoid what? Yep. It is very tricky because otherwise the knight from f4 would go to e2 check, and either the rook would have to take it and the bishop takes the rook and white loses an exchange, or otherwise the knight on e2 would grab the queen on c1. That is what is behind this move. Bishop goes to a6. For Maxim Govorukha, computer would rather have the queen go to g4 and threaten mate on g2. Bishop to b2 for myskin that doesn't like the pin on the bishop, and now black either has to the black queen either has to battle the c file or exchange with the white queen on c1. Knight to d3 for Maxim Govorukha that threatens both bishop on b2 and queen on c1. And we completed the first 25 moves. Now the advantage of Maxim Govorukha becomes quite large, 3.8. This means that Maxim Govorukha can even get away with one or two small mistakes and still win the game. But let's see. Queen to c1. Now the knight on d3 is attacked. My king attacks a knight on Maxim Govorukha, and this is a great knight on d3. If you can place your knight so near the opponent's part of the board and also be safe, that is great. It controls quite a lot of squares around white's king. Knight will go to f2 with a check. The computer would rather have the rook go to e8. You may think that if instead, let's see it again, if instead the rook went to e8, then white can use the rook to take this knight on d3, bishop takes back, queen takes back, but then we are very near a back rank mate. Let's try once again to do the experiment in our mind. Rook goes to e8, we said. Bishop takes, rook to e8. Then rook takes knight, bishop takes rook, queen takes bishop. If rook goes here to e1 check, then the knight can go to f1 and cover protected by the queen. But then the black queen could come, and although there is no back rank yet made yet, white situation will become very difficult. That's what the computer would prefer, but you lose at least an exchange for that with no guarantee of something to happen. No, you lose two pieces for the rook. That's what what black was going to lose. Bishop and knight for the white rook. Not an exchange, I'm sorry. But it's a very dangerous attack. Then queen could perhaps go to somewhere to distract the black queen, distract the white queen, and it's near mate. But that's not what happened. Instead, we had the check here, as we mentioned before, that computer thinks it's inaccuracy. King goes to g1, the only move. You see, when you see this white circle in gray background, it means the only move. No choice there. Knight goes to g4. Very good move for Maxim Govorukha. Threatens the rook on e3 and also controls the f2 and h2 squares are very near the white king and could perhaps lead to a mate. If magically the queen could go to h2, it needs two moves to go there. Then it's mate next move, king to f1 and queen to No, 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 it's mate because you have the bishop on a6 control this diagonal. Exactly, yes. Let's see how game continues. Rook to c3 attacks the queen on c8. If only the queen was on c7, it would be mate. On queen goes to d8. Computer would rather have it go to e6. Pawn to h3. Clearly, the knight on g4 is too dangerous for my skin, so my skin wants to drive it away. Knight goes to f6, saves the knight, but now it's not so easy for the mating combination we saw before. Knight to f3 for my skin. Wants to cover the h2 square. Knight goes to e4 for Maxim Govorukha and threatens the rook on c3. And we see after 30 moves, the advantage of Maxim Govorukha has fallen a little bit to 2.6. Still, it seems they are winning the game, but now they cannot afford these little mistakes that they could afford before, because most likely they made them already in these last 5 moves. Let's continue. Rook to e3 for my skin attacks a knight on e4. That is very, very dangerous. If they could win the knight and the d5 pawn for the rook on e3, it would be very good for them, even though materially it counts as winning 4 and sacrificing 5. Queen to f6 for Maxim Govorukha. Queen to e1 for my skin, not what the computer likes. Rook to c8 for Maxim Govorukha threatens to place the queen, actually the rook on c2, have a very strong attack, and see what happens. Knight to e5, so my skin places the knight on e5, but the computer would rather have it go to d2 and threaten to exchange with the knight on e4, not only that, even win the pawn after that. Rook goes to c2 for Maxim Govorukha, threatens the bishop on b2, and threatens a very, very dangerous attack. My skin saves the bishop, places it on c1, and also protects the rook on e3. Queen goes to g5 for Maxim Govorukha and threatens mate on g2. So my skin needs to do something to avoid a mate. And what does Maxim decide to do? Place the pawn on g4 and yes, avoids the mate, but weakens the position very much. When you push pawn in front of your king, you weaken it very much. That is why, believe it or not, the computer gives an advantage of 8.1 for Maxim Govorukha, even though materially they are only 1 pawn up. And after the best move of Maxim Govorukha with queen to f4 and threatening mate on h2, my skin decided to resign and Maxim Govorukha wins one more game. And how could white defend the mate on h2? If rook goes to e2, of course, queen goes to e2, forget it, or d2 f2, they lose the queen. If it goes to e2, then after a series of exchanges, will be down at least a rook, if not a queen. And maybe the best answer would be queen, knight goes to f3. This would postpone it. In this case, there would still be a dense attack, and in fact, computer would show that it's making 12 moves, not so easy. Maybe my skin could try the knight to f3, but in any case, they're down by 8.1. And we'll click here where it says no, so checkmate will only show that there is a mate on h2. But this concludes the game. In any case, Maxim Govorukha one more win. And let's go to the game review to see how did the two players do overall. We'll stop sharing the screen. We'll share the other screen. And let's see what happens if we share the screen. I hope it will be shared correctly. Yes. You see here what is happening, that the accuracy of myskin was 78.8, for maximgovorukha 88.2. They played as if their ratings were 1350 for myskin and 1950 for maximgovorukha. Maximgovorukha had one brilliant move when the knight went to f5 and, excuse me, to e5, I'm sorry, and was threatening uh, knight on f3. One great each of them, three book moves each of them. Best 18 for Maxim Govorukha versus 14 for my skin. Excellent 3 versus 1 for Maxim Govorukha. Good 7 versus 3 for my skin. Inaccuracy 6 versus 4 for my skin. Mistakes, 2 mistakes. My skin 1, Maxim Govorukha. 1 miss for Maxim Govorukha, and there were no blunders. This concludes this game. We're not going to show the points of the Greco chess because we would spoil the surprise. Because 4 other games have already been completed and they would show up in the points. In the meantime, we're going to go to the tournaments and see what is happening at the Underwater Moonlight, the 9 Moons tournament. That is near the end of the first round. You see here, for the first round to complete, we only need 25 more games remaining. And we have more than 4 rounds being completed. Round number 1, at this point, Canon 1972 has advanced already. You see Lotus Time chess from Japan and Oil Kimbo from Australia. Marku 1409 has the same points, 10 points like Canon 1972, but even if Canon 1972 loses the last 2 games, still with the tie-breaking points, 58 versus 53.5 has advanced. Group 2, 2 out of the 3 places have been decided. Spider 99 from Egypt, Luciano Cojan from Argentina. For the third place, there is a small, it's between Junlei 123 from China versus Abdul Basit Kwarizada from Afghanistan. They are very near. No, no, it's mostly the Abdul Basit Kwarizada has too many games that have not been completed and perhaps might get enough points to pass. Group 3, almost everything has been decided. Maxim Govorukha, the finalist and from the grecochess, is leading here 14 out of 14 and has 2 games remaining. Vien Carvanans from Malaysia, yes, has already advanced. Zaniro from Italy, the way things are going, if my calculations are correct, he has definitely advanced, while Silvio 8888 has a small chance to tie. But it's between the two of them. If my calculations are correct, Zaniro has definitely advanced, while Silvio 8888 has some chance to also to tie in the tie-breaking points and also advance. Now, groups 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we're not going to repeat. They have been completed. Group 9 is the one that nothing has been decided since too many games remain, with Steam Rocket leading with 12 points. That's it for here. We have 4 more games that have been completed from Greco chess tournaments. We are going to continue covering them. Next video will be 1 more of them. And then if things go the way expected, it's going to be round number 3 from the December Swiss from the Queen's Chess Club. And then we'll have the other 3 games. And let's see if the last 2 games have been completed. That's it for now. And thanks for watching. Thanks to all the viewers, subscribers, the likes, the comments. I'm Harilas Aniziris. This is the Greco Chess YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.